Next topic revolves around an important question. Is blended care the future of healthcare delivery for patients and providers? Let's dive into it by welcoming our guest, Sander Ruitenberg, Digital Health Solutions Head at Novartis. Applause, please. We have Ritesh Patel, Senior Partner, Global Digital Health in Partners. Hello, Ritesh. And we have Daniel Fallscheer, CEO and co-founder at DasLab. The discussion is going to be moderated by Aahuti, partner at 4 Points Consulting. And the job of the moderator is always the toughest, I would imagine. Let's make sure that the microphones are working.
Testing, testing.
And I leave it to you. Enjoy.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. So is blended care the future of healthcare delivery for patients and providers? And just a shortcut to the end, I think the answer is yes. But of course, there is more to it than that. And I think we've now seen lots of examples of blended care in existence. We've possibly all even experienced it ourselves. And for the avoidance of any doubt, blended in this context, of course, we're talking about digital, blended with traditional models of care. And in the recent years, and obviously since the pandemic, there has been this surge. And we've had many solutions that have demonstrated economic benefits around patient experience, outcomes. So the question, is a very good question, and the answer is clear. I really don't think we're going to be going backwards anytime soon. But we all know, because we're in this space, we're either innovating or we're investing or we're buying, we're choosing, we're using some of these solutions. We know that there is more to this topic than meets the eye. So I'm really privileged that I have 3 very experienced and credible individuals on the panel with me. And I'll hand over to each of you, if that's okay, just to perhaps elaborate on the introduction that was kindly done for us, but maybe you may want to add something to that. And maybe we can get the conversation going, if you're able, to just kind of share your opening position on this. I think in our preparation, we all agreed, yes, it definitely is the future. But what's your opening position on this? And then we can deep dive into some of the topics.
Yeah, so I'm Daniel. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of DasLab, and what we're building is a digital infrastructure for lab testing. And basically the relevance of lab testing is pretty huge, because 70% of all decision making relies upon lab testing. So building an infrastructure, I always compare it as building a highway, and this is tough. So you have to have use cases to show the power of it. Also showing power of interoperability, of seamless connection along certain pathways. And my opening statement is like hybrid care or blended care. It starts happening. I see, for example, strong use cases in combination with telemedicine, where you can have like screening testing solutions, at scale, where you can treat a massive cohort of people, but for example, only add the telemedical piece, the doctoral piece towards the end, where only a very small portion of patient really needs it. So you can like screen 100 patients, but maybe only 6 of them need to talk to a doctor because they have a positive test result, but still you can treat like 100 patients. And that adds tremendous value for the system and also for basically health insurance to payers. So it's a use case that we're scaling big. It took us 18 months to basically close that. So blended care is something that you have to convince also several partners underway. Everybody looks into what's my piece of it. Who at the end owns the data, by the way? Who is allowed to own that? Data security, but also, basically data ownership is really tough. Insurances are really keen to control that. But we realize now also the contracting around it is pretty tough because it's innovation. But we realize, the ROIs are super big, so they're open to do new kinds of contracting. So I believe in the screening world, prevention world, this is something the train has left the station. There is, in my view, no way back. Telemedicine providers love it because they suddenly see an application of telemedicine beyond just speaking medicine. And this is not already including any new kinds of technology we're seeing. It's basically just combining of what we're having right now. but it can address big cohorts of people. So we believe this is going to be a very impressive market going forward, and more to come in that space, I guess.
Thank you, Daniel. Ritesh.
Hi, Ritesh Patel. I have a very myopic view. My view is if it moves, digitize it, right? So I approach it from that mentality set. I would say the other piece is looking at it from a human behavior perspective. The analogy I use is we're now in a hybrid work model. People are happy with working from home, used to using screens, and that should apply to healthcare as well. So I think, to your point, the train has left the station, and us as human behavior will expect this. So is it the future? Well, we'll have to do it because the patient will expect it. So that's my opening salvo. There you are.
Thank you, Ritesh. Sander.
So I work for Novartis in digital health solutions. Maybe to give an example of where we were a few years ago, we did a successful pilot on hospital discharge, supporting that with a chatbot for the first 60 days. Although that's by no means blended care, I do think it gives us a good indication of what can work. I think we need to separate very clearly the administrative burden, which we can also resolve, which I don't consider to be blended care, from what really is blended care. So defining it very clearly for ourselves and all the other stakeholders will be really important, because I think there's multiple interpretations. For me, blended care is a critical part of our future, both when it comes to accessibility of healthcare, the efficiency of healthcare, and ultimately the sustainability of healthcare. I think with the aging population, going with the current model will simply not be able to serve everyone. And so really finding a seamless way of working with both digital and non-digital is going to be critical for us to just maintain the quality of healthcare and hopefully also bring it into parts of the world that maybe don't have it as we do. I think the trick really will be to find it a more seamless transition, make it less disruptive for both healthcare providers and patients. I think a lot of the solutions today are pretty hands-on, and I would say that they don't necessarily feel like naturally transitioning from, let's say, a digital towards a non-digital component and back. So I think there's a lot of work to do to truly make it blended, but I think all the indicators are that this is definitely a successful path for us to follow.
And I think we've already touched on, in your opening statements, we've already touched on a number of points that I'd love for us to probe a little bit more. Sander, your point there around, the word blended is actually a very specific word. And I think what we witness in a lot of the experiences and pathways today are layers, additionality, not necessarily true blending, because we still have issues around integration, interoperability. We haven't really mapped out the new workflows and pathways as if we were designing them for digital. We're really just trying to incrementally slot things in and adapt. We've also already touched upon, the issues around, I wouldn't say issues, it's just a big part of the puzzle here around, the data. As well. So I think if it's not really a question of yes or no, the answer is definitely yes, the train has left the station. I think it's really, as a panel, for us to talk about what sort of shape it takes, what will it take to make healthcare of the future truly blended, and is it suitable in some parts more than others, for some cohorts more than others. So these are some of the topics that I'd love for us to start talking about. It might make sense, therefore, to start with some examples. If I can ask each of you to delve into the experiences that you have in this space and perhaps volunteer some examples where you feel we really do have a good showcase of blended healthcare delivery for the future. And then maybe expanding on that example around, does that indicate a specific area where blended is most suited for the future? So I won't put anyone in the spotlight, but whoever's kind of already thinking of the answer, go for it.
I'll go first. Look, first of all, I think we need to get rid of the word blended totally, and I think we talked about this when we did the sort of hi, who are you, what do you do kind of thing, right? I think it's just a new way of delivering care, that we have to think of the customer experience. They're not a patient, they're a customer, and what does that experience look like? And if you then map that out, you can look at points in the solution or the journey where you have to do physical, and then points where you can do digital or, the hybrid, whatever those words are that you want to put together. I do a lot of work in remote patient monitoring at the moment. That seems to be the big thing for chronic patients who don't want to come back to the building. And so there, it's basics, like a wearable that just tracks something for you rather than you having to digitally type something into a diary. Right? Changing that model alone has really seen a difference in the way people are being taken care of, because the nurses now get alerted based on an algorithm that they're seeing from a wearable that's coming through, as opposed to calling every patient every time. So that's one example of changing the model rather than saying, I'm going to now do hybrid care for you versus not for you, that sort of thing. So
Okay.
That's my start. So
All right, thank you, Ritesh.
Maybe I elaborated already on the screening solution that we have. So I believe screening based on screening for big cohorts, in I think early cancer, like colorectal cancer, prostate, HPV. Maybe there are some others, beginning, early identification of chronic diseases. I do believe this is a case where you should not let the patient alone with just a test, but really have somebody supervising on that with a medical view. So using a telemedicine or AI or whatever. I believe that's going to be a big application because we see adoption rates are super low. And we now see that, so roughly, for example, adoption rates in the cohort is roughly around 15%. That's totally unacceptable for colorectal cancer. So are we able to achieve like adoption rates of 50, 60%? That's going to be a dramatic change. Currently 60,000 people are dying from colorectal cancer in Germany per year. The interesting fact by implementing these is a little bit maybe the pushback we are seeing also, blended or hybrid care means we're going in some parts against classical care. And we have heavy debates with big KOLs, for example, gastroenterologists, where we are saying like, the way we are providing early screening should be the norm because we can control also the differences of different test types and so on. But that would mean you, dear doctor, your dear GP, should not be allowed to do this anymore. That's the reality. So that means if we want to push hybrid, that means we have to go into, I would not say confrontation, but into interaction with also societies, of those specialists, and really taking them by the hand. And first of all, taking them away also the fear. Because at the end, I think we all share a big purpose. We want to make, so to say, people more healthy, but we should not scream for more reimbursement, because GPs are crying for more reimbursement. They say, give us more money and we're going to achieve exactly the same. Dear guys, the last 20 years you haven't proven to do this.
Yep.
But this is going to be interesting in blended care. There are great concepts, great first, I would say, initiatives and contracts, but the scaling of that is something that requires also classical care providers to accept the new norm.
But don't you think, as we hurtle towards value-based care, that those things may change? I know it's a big behavior change thing, right, as you said, but surely there's some pressures now coming in based on the value-based care models, no?
We're currently applying for a tender in a country. I'm not going into details, but I said to my team, I said, look guys, why don't we do a value-based pricing for that? Why don't we, because basically they're saying, I give you the whole cohort, you manage the whole program. And I said, okay, let's maybe think in terms of business model. I pay you a fixed price, committing to achieve X. If I'm not, I pay you something back. But if I achieve better, that's mine. That's true value-based care. I think that's too far. Although I had value-based care agreements in my days back in the medtech company 10 years ago, I still don't see that at scale. Unfortunately, Babylon did also not a nice job, I think, to put value-based contracts, somewhere in a different corner.
So let's just pick up on those two examples. And Sander, if I can bring you in more in terms of helping us talk through some of those examples shared by Ritesh and Daniel there.
So actually, I think there's, for me, a better example.
Oh, okay.
So
all right.
For me, the key area to do it first is early diagnostics. Because I agree with your GP example, although most countries don't have enough GPs, so we probably need to have a discussion about that. But I think actually early diagnostics is an area where the patient is unknown. And we know that they are searching for information, but we haven't identified them yet, nor the industry, nor have the physicians. And so for me, actually, where blended care begins and where we can get people starting to get used to blended care is actually early diagnostics. The end diagnostic should always be done by a healthcare professional, in my opinion. But that early process, making it more intelligent and making it more supported, is where we've been very successful with, I would personally think very successful with Ada Health, for instance. There's a lot of work still to do, but it's an area that's an enormous black box, and it's really a need for patients to be far more supported.
Yeah, okay. So let's maybe pick up on these examples that, that you have shared, and maybe touch on what is it that we still need to solve for blended care, drop the blended, for care to be delivered in this way moving forward, if we believe through those examples that these are very scalable and beneficial use cases for digital to intervene. And let me just pick up on the screening and the early diagnostic area for a moment. So Daniel, you already touched upon one of the barriers that we have today in terms of incentives and how they're set up. There's another barrier around screening, which is also in relation to what happens downstream when we can screen so much more effectively and efficiently for across populations, identifying more cases, and then downstream there's still a restriction, there are still constraints on how we then respond to the outcome of that screening. So that's kind of one. Hold that thought just for a moment, because I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And then Sandra, just bringing in your point around the early diagnostics. It's something today which doesn't get funded, right? Because the care model isn't used to doing early diagnostics. And so therefore we're then going to healthcare providers and payers to say, actually, this isn't in your budget today, but it's a new service, and in the longer term, we're going to have better health outcomes for this population, but you need to make the maths work right here, right now, and believe that long term it's going to pay off. So really interested in hearing the panel's thoughts on those couple of challenges, if this is truly going to become the future.
Yeah, so it's funny you say that, because I was literally thinking that. I didn't go there because it was another part of the topic. But you know, we can do things as a pharma company campaign-wise, and we do those things, of course. But this is exactly the tricky part, is because it's not yet someone in the healthcare system, there's typically no allocated funding for it. So that is where we need to rethink it. I think the other part of the story is we need to rethink how physicians are reimbursed and what's actually chargeable as well. So you were talking about the GPs. You know, we as an industry, regulatory authorities, as well as the healthcare provider organizations, do need to rethink the role of physicians and nurses and other healthcare providers in this new care model. And that hasn't really been taking place. So the problem right now is that they have these huge administrative burdens that we haven't resolved. They're sort of in a hybrid model, which is the worst, because they have the old model and they're asked to adapt to the new model, but no one's freeing up the money and the time for them to actually make that shift.
But maybe Sander, on the reimbursement, I slightly disagree, because, you know, take currently, so in colorectal cancer, you take in Germany all the reimbursement codes, you add them together and come to a certain value. And the way we've been winning all those tenders is we were going in, we betted 1 cent below. I said, guys, innovation is not more expensive than it is right now when you provide the care. Number one. Where does this now trickle down? Of course, I want to earn money, you know. And there's stuff in it, you know, there are people, by the way, so to say, like labs, for example, do they like it? On the one side, they love it, it's 4-year contracts. On the other side, they have to give away 50% of their price. That's unfortunately reality, but it's still a very, very nice business for them. So I think if we find a way to suit this into the current reimbursement models in terms of what is basically the money allocated to it, I think then you can make it work. This is how you can convince payers. This is how we convince them now at scale. Is it still awkward to have an ROI that is 1,000 to 1? Yes, it is. Do I want to have more of that? For sure, but I first have to prove I do it better than the current system. But you know, value-based healthcare, I totally believe there is a play to make, but I think it takes time. And the downstream, I fully agree. It doesn't help if we just screen more people and find more, because one thing that we then addressed with a telemedicine provider is, within 8 minutes, you can have a guaranteed call with a telemedicine provider to talk about a critical result. When do they normally arrive? Really, it's Friday afternoon. Oftentimes, do you want to leave a patient alone with a positive early screening result? No, you don't. do you then want to have a fast appointment with a gastroenterologist, to do a coloscopy potentially? Yes. Is that easy? No, but you can collaborate with the Dr. Leaps and so on of the world to at least find screening options around you. But this downstream, in this recent tender, they really thought it through. You have to offer even the scheduling for a coloscopy within 2 weeks. So there is something evolving.
So where I struggle a bit, I understand the model from a payer perspective, and I know it's working, but I struggle with that a little bit as a healthcare provider if I'm a hospital manager, because you may be 1 cent below and win the tender, but I've invested in the past 10 years in an infrastructure that is actually supposed to carry out that service. So you're asking me to adopt a system, my payer is pushing me to adopt the system, but I have a lot of people walking around, and I've made investments into very expensive equipment and infrastructure that needs to be also addressed. And I think that's where we are sometimes forgetting, the history, and that's why I say we need to carve out space for these changes from both a financial and a time perspective, because otherwise we're just competing, and I don't really think that that's going to accelerate the shift.
But there's got to be some health economic studies that can be done around all this, right, for specific areas where you can prove the model. I think the bigger issue we face is the infrastructure issue, the data collection and the sharing of the data. Some GPs don't even want access to the data. I'm glad you're collecting it, but don't show it to me, right?
Interesting, Ritesh, you touched on that, because your example of the wearable and the remote monitoring is something I wanted to come back to really talk through some of the challenges around data sharing, interoperability. We do those topics to death, I feel, at health tech conferences because we really feel the pain of those. But when is there too much data, for one, and also barriers around access, inclusivity, different generations? I'd love to kind of bring in some of the societal topics into this part of the conversation also, because we do need to consider who's on the receiving end of this. And let me just finish off with an example, and I won't name the organization, but there is a provider of one of the bigger providers of virtual ward technologies in the UK who put out a very public statement to say that they are actually limiting the amount of data that they collect and convey back to the clinical teams, because having your blood pressure recorded every 7 minutes is just too much, and it's not going to materially affect the decision. And to your point, Ritesh, the data, they don't, sometimes the clinical teams don't want that data. They haven't been trained and set up to act in that way and to kind of provide guidance and make decisions in that way. So, I guess on those few points there, around sort of data sharing, acting on data, from a clinical decision perspective, and then some of the societal issues. If I can leave that with you as a panel to comment on, all of those.
Well, I'll give you a real world. We just finished a thing with 900 patients for asthma, right? So it was basically collecting data about triggers, overlaying some other information around things like the weather and what's happening in their local area, collecting that over a period of time and showing them that there are moments in time that they didn't know about where the triggers were there because they were collecting that data and using it, just mainly around what is triggering my asthma and then what do I do about it. Very basic stuff. For the patients, it was fantastic. They changed their way of behaving. They put in air filters in their houses because they realized that the weather had an impact, right? The air conditioning unit HEPA filter wasn't working well, those kinds of things. So I think it's that combination of giving them whatever tool they can use to monitor what they're doing, but then giving them practical suggestions of how to change their behavior or to add things to whatever they're doing to help them live a better life. That data then is provided as a PDF to the doctor at their next visit. So the doctor reviews the PDF. It doesn't go into the EHR. Everybody tries to connect to the EHR, but the doctor loves it. There's a chart on the top that says, here's the 30 days. These were the moments of triggers. This is what happened. And then the doctor sort of says, okay, this is what you need to do to continue with your asthma treatment. I think basics like that, if you put them together, could work really, really well. It doesn't have to be completely integrated all the time. So there's a real-world example that we've just finished.
Yeah, mine is maybe a bit of a different angle to that, because the infrastructure for data sharing, first of all, is archaic. We have silos, massive fragmentation. I can only oversee the lab space, but we have 400 labs in Germany. My assumption is we have 400 different configurations of lab information systems, and we have 10,000 different ways on how you can basically code a test. And that all for 7,000 parameters. So, if we want to make this work at scale, cross-sectoral, we have to have a solid data infrastructure behind, first of all. And that means, and this is basically, you may think, why is DasLab sitting here talking about a service business? At the end, we're a digital infrastructure interoperability business, but it's so tough to land those deals that you have to showcase the power of interconnectivity with such use cases. And that's, I think, a big portion that is required. Electronic health record, like EPA in Germany and in other countries, I think they will facilitate that. And once we have that, once we have data in a standardized format flowing seamlessly between the different providers, recipients, whatever, then you can first really think of solutions at scale. So my problem oftentimes is we're dreaming from that one little thing that's possible, but the question is, how can we scale this to the whole population? And then suddenly we realize, shit, this IT systems, infrastructure, architecture will not make it work. So I'm a big fan of let's solve the groundwork first, and then we can dream of any Gen AI to put onto it, But this solid foundation is something that requires massive investment, and nobody really wants to tap into it because there are strong forces also to keep it where it is.
So I have a quick fire question next, and this is really just to make efficient use of the time we have left. So I'll be coming to the audience for questions in just a moment, and therefore we'll keep this as a very rapid response. If you had to pick one country that you would really place your bets on, because we still tend to think about country silos, we're still not really thinking about the promise of blended care on a global scale, which country would you put your bets on in terms of making the most advances in blended care for the future? And I'm not going to ask you to substantiate your response, so just real quick fire. If the audience are interested in why, I'll leave it to them to ask the question. So, Sander, which country?
United States.
Okay, Ritesh.
I work in the US, so it's a no-brainer.
So I have to be at least in the European continent. I believe it's going to be either Eastern Europe or Middle East.
Okay, thank you. And do we have any questions from the audience?
Exactly, ladies and gentlemen. Anyone would like to ask a question to our panelists?
Gosh, we were that good.
Or everyone is exhausted after the last networking session talking. Yeah.
Any
Looks like you still have 4 minutes.
Yeah, okay, great. Well, okay.
Well, maybe to go back to the data point then.
I think so.
Because I think it's an important point.
Okay.
You did mention it, but I think we maybe need to be a bit more even harsh in our wording. We need to keep it simple. We overcomplicate every step of the way. Most of us in the room, myself included, are a little bit geeky. We are probably many other things, but a geek is inside us. And we're completely biased. And so we need to be far more disciplined in how we design and deliver in this case, blended care or just care, digital care. It's too complicated. It asks for too much data. Most of the time, at least, we do a lot of research in this space, especially in the onboarding onto treatment, for instance. Most of the times, we're not answering the questions patients have, which may simply be, why have I been prescribed this treatment in the first place? And then there's maybe a window of opportunity of a few months, sometimes a few weeks, where they're actually willing to engage with the information and with the data and with the solutions. But in the longer run, all they want to do is go back to their normal lives. And so we talk a lot about patients. It's important, but patients are still people. And they, more than anything, just want to get on with the rest of their life. So I think when we think of data and how we design for data, really keeping it very simple is key. You did allude to that. I just think we need to be a little even more strict in our wording and more disciplined in how we approach it.
And do you feel, as a panel interested in your views, that we're sometimes overwhelming the providers, the payers, the end users, whether they're people, patients, with almost too much sophistication, given what our baseline is? Or do you feel we can help them make the leap to what we have now and what the promise is and what the potential is? Or do you think we need to scale it back and do it step by step?
I think we don't talk enough about value in an intuitive way. So we talk a lot about how great our solution is and how amazing the results are or will be, but translating that to an individual value for a healthcare provider in their day-to-day or for a patient in their day-to-day that really feels intuitive, I think that's where we often struggle. So if there's a lot of data collected and we can really explain in simple wording why, certainly there will be a window of opportunity for that, but we typically don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
I work with a lot of health systems. The biggest pain is when somebody calls a health system and says, I've got a great solution for your problem. And they go, what's the problem? I didn't know I had that problem. So I think that's the other issue we face is we create a digital solution. We believe that's the only solution that will work, and we try and sell it into a payer or a health system. Most of the times they didn't even know they had that problem because they're too busy looking after patients who are not even coming back to the hospital for chronic care, right? So as the digital guy, this is anathema to everything I believe in, but sometimes the digital solution may not be the right solution, to your point earlier.
Yeah, I fully agree with both. I think we have to be, the experience from, at the end, the users, whoever that is, I think that has to be so simple and intuitive as we expect it from any consumer app that we're using. To make it look that easy with the archaic infrastructure that I mentioned, that's the key challenge because we have to solve it at the back end. And I do see a big gap of knowledge and interest. We love tech. We love integrations. I can tell you health insurance doesn't like any of that. So they're even struggling to send out 70,000 emails to insured people, identifying the right ones. They're basically failing at the lowest. So we have to educate them, take them at the hand, on the hand, guide them through the process, and then I think make them feel comfortable with it. Because it's different the way they grew up. Most of them, they never seen something like that. Also, decision makers and board members, they're then passionate when they have it in their hand, but they simply grew up completely different. So it's a change management that we have to add on top of it to also take those affected user groups by the hand, make them engaged. And as you fully agree, you have to prove the value, and the value is not always just an ROI thing. I'm a true believer in personally related, so say non-clinical outcome measures, so qualities and so on. So, hey, we have to give something meaningful to the patient. Why should he do this? Because if you're sitting in a bus, the likelihood that 5 people in this bus are gonna have colorectal cancer, that's a bad thing. If you do it, screen early, the likelihood you're gonna find it early and not gonna have that disease, that's a value for you. Very simple. And if you can get that within 3-4 days instead of 6 weeks, that's a simple value to explain. But I fully agree, you have to drill it down to this simplicity.
I think the big thing we didn't talk about, which we talked before, is the generational thing, the next generation that's coming through, both on the physician side as well as on the patient side, and the behavior that they have, right?
Do you really believe that new physicians new generations do think that different?
Well, we have the first Patel in the house as a doctor. He's not a failure. So he's wandering around asking Siri questions during his residency. I followed him for about a day. So I'm not sure. I think there is a model that's coming through of expectation. And it's part of the human behavior thing, I think, right? So that's something we may want to think about, maybe next 5 years, perhaps.
And just in our last sort of minute or so, I just want to zoom out and look at the landscape from a macro perspective and then project out. We're coming to the end of 2023. So I firmly believe that what we have seen at play in the digital health sector is Amara's law is very much at play. And so for those that are not familiar with Amara's law, there's usually some kind of a trigger when it comes to technology. And then we have this period of, just an absolute peak, heightened expectations. Everyone's the spotlight is on the sector. And then there are some casualties, the Babylons, the pairs, there are some challenges. We discover that actually this is not as easy, even though the promise is there and the expectations are high and the euphoria is there. There's then sort of a downward fall. And then we start getting some enlightenment and we start seeing some successes and we start seeing some scalability and sustainability. And then we just become normal, right? It plateaus after a period of time, and that's just the normal model until the next surge comes along. So I firmly believe that this past year, we've really seen that dip. We've seen that dip, and then next year, we're going to start kind of seeing the climb again as we hear more success stories. What's your prediction and view on the future of the digital health sector?
I mean, just being here, I mean, this is my third conference, Health Tech Forward. I'm seeing the language change. We're talking more about processes. We talk a lot more about integration. We talk a lot less about standalone solutions and far more integrating ourselves into the healthcare system and being part of the healthcare system. That already shows me that we're moving upward, because those are the types of dialogues we need to have. Now, do we need to go faster? Maybe a little bit. I do think that's where AI, augmented intelligence especially, will really help us.
Thank you, Sander.
3 to 5 years, I think.
Yeah. Thank you, Ritesh.
For me, in digital health, many focus on solving a certain very specific problem still. Also companies, of course, we have to start focus somewhere. I don't see many tapping into the big challenges. I haven't seen anybody in 3-4 years as we founded now doing somebody in digital infrastructure and testing. Zero. I don't see anybody.
Yeah.
Some write it on their slides, but actually they're not doing it. So I think that's going to be, the question is, will money flow there, you know? Is basically also these investors, is that the right way to fund this? It's a huge undertaking. Let's see what 24 brings. I'm generally positive-minded, but let's really see. We're going to fundraise next year. I think that we know more how the market environment is. You know.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you to the panel for your incredible inputs and views. And thank you to the audience.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Aahuti. Thank you, Daniel, Ritesh, Sander. Thank you very much again.